So we'll start on Yud Gimel Amid Beis. See exactly where we can start. Yeah. We'll start with Rabbah. Omar Rabbah, let's just see where that is. Omar Rabbah, it's about maybe 12 lines down from the top of the on Yud Gimel Amid Beis. The first word in the line is Hani. And there are different shiurim in Peiros and Yerokus. At what stage in their development are we kover the shnas masros? Because we cannot be mafresh maser from the Peiros of 1 year on the Peiros of another year. And the Gemara had quoted a Mishnah in the second parak of Shvius with regard to various kinds of growths of vegetations that took root before Rosh Hashana, but yet they did not grow and develop and weren't harvested until after Rosh Hashana. And according to the Mishnah in Shvius, since they grew to a large extent, as they reached an advanced stage of development before Rosh Hashanah, therefore they belong to last year. Which means that you could be mafresh maser from them, even though, again, the harvest won't come until after Rosh Hashanah on the peiros that grew and were harvested before Rosh Hashanah. Which would mean, for example, if, let's say, the vegetation took root already in the 6th year of the Shemitah cycle, then it might have Kedushas, it might have the din of Shishis, even though it was not harvested until after Rosh Hashanah. It would be Mutar b'Shvius. Omar Rabbah, Rabbah says the following. Omar Rabbanan, this is a Gemara later on, that with regard to fruits on the tree, basar hanata. That's if we want to be kover the year of the Maser, whether it belongs to last year or this year, we're going to make that determination at the moment that the peiros reach the state of hanata. He says in the footnote here, based on Rashi, that hanata is a certain stage in the development of the tree when the perach falls, right? There's a certain perach, a flower that falls off, and that's called chanota. So we're going to be kover the shnas hamaser based on the chanota of the peiros. However, in the case of tuah v'zeisim, which means the 5 species of grains and olives, basa shlish, we wait until 1/3 of its growth. So the kviyas shnas hamas in the case of zeisim and tvua will depend upon the year in which they grew and already developed a shlish. So if it developed a shlish in shishis, then it lacks kedusha shvius. And now we get to the 3rd category, which is yeret, and that's basal ukita. That depends upon exactly when we harvested the vegetables. So we have 3 categories. We've got peiros se'ilim depend upon chanota, we have tuah and zeisim depend upon shlish, and we have yerek that depends upon lakita. Now we get to a 4th category, and that's called kitnios, legumes. Like we're going to have a Gemara soon about pul ha-mitzvah, kind of a legume. And he says hani, meaning these kitnios, also depend upon hashrosh. Well, actually, when you think about kiman shavinu rabbana, hashrosha was not one of the 3 candidates. We had Chanoto, we had Shlish, and we had Lakita. We didn't have Hashrosha. So Kidneys is very weird. It's a fluke. It doesn't fit into any of the three major categories of Zroyim. It has its own din of Hashrosha.
Right.
So Hadar Amar Rabba now tries to explain why kidney is dependent upon Hashrosha. Mitoch asuyim prachim. That kidneys they don't harvest the entire planting of the legumes in one shot, but rather they do it piecemeal. And it depends on whether it's royal or pricha. So here in the Masechet, he tells you that pricha means hotzas zare hakidnios me'amots, that the seeds are covered by a chaff, and when the chaff begins to fall, and now the seeds are exposed, that's called pricha. And that doesn't happen in one fell swoop, what we call simultaneous, but rather it goes stage by stage. So therefore it's impossible, according to Rabba's logic, that the Shnas HaMaser with regard to kidneos should be determined by Lakita, because there is no uniform Lakita for all the kidneos. And therefore, Azli Rabbanan Basa Hashrosh, the Rabbanan had to find an alternative to determine whether or not it's Yashan belongs to last year or it's Chadash belongs to this year. And we're going to look for some stage in the development of kidneos which is uniform for all the kidneos, and that's called Hashrosh. Because even though Lakita is not b'vasachas, not b'yachad, but rather zecher zeh, but the Hashrosha is b'vasachas. Amalei Abai disagrees. And he says the following: you're worried about the fact, you're excluding Lakita, which would have been the natural tendency or attraction that we would have classified kidneos like Yerokos, Basal Lakita, and you're rejecting that. Why? Because you never have a uniform Lakita for all the kidneos. Says Abai, there's a simple solution to that problem. And if I'm not mistaken, what Abai is about to present is based on the Shita of Shimon Chizuri, which we're about to learn. Yitzbar Garno L'Socha. What he can do is, even though he does the Lakita, the harvesting of the kidneos in a piecemeal method, he can gather them all together into one pile and mix them all together. And once he mixes them all together, then I don't have to worry anymore about what's inside the mixture, meaning that there are some kidneos that were harvested from before Rosh Hashana and some after Rosh Hashana. There's some that's Yashan, it belongs to last year, and some that are Chadash and belong to the new year. I can solve that problem by mixing them all together in one kri, in one pot. Because then I have a simple solution, Abai, to your problem, Rabbah. The problem that was the basis of your rejection of Lakita. I could have both Yashan and Chadash last year and this year mixed together in one kri. I know that when I'm mafresh from the kri, there'll be both Yashan and Chadash in the hafresh, in the Maseh. And therefore I'll conclude or establish that the part of the Maseh that I took from last year's Lakita will be Maser on last year's Lakita. And the part that I'll be mafresh from the new year of Lakita That'll be for the Tvua Chadasha from this year. And this is based on a principle called Blila Yafa. Blila Yafa means that I could make a perfect, ideal mixture of two things, even in the case of solids. We'll see about liquids a lot easier. But even in the case of solids, like kidneos, I can make a Blila Yafa. And once I make a Blila Yafa, I can rely on the fact that whatever I take out will be an ample representation of both elements that are in the mixture. And Abai wants to prove this based on Rab Shimon Shizuri. Milo, Tanya, don't we have a brisa in Masechet Shvius? Rab Yossi ben Akipar, Omar Mishum Rab Shimon Shizuri. He tells you that the name Shizuri comes from the city which is called Shazur. And he quotes this in the name of the Kafta V'Ferach. Kafta V'Ferach's name was Farchi. He took the name Farchi and he put it into Ferach, Kafta V'Ferach. Anyway, Ol HaMitzri. So these are beans or legumes that grow in massive amounts in Mitzrayim, in Egypt. Zura'o Lezera, if he planted them because he wants to eat the Zra'im, which are the beans, the legumes, it has the status of kidneos, and therefore it depends upon Hashrosh. As we saw earlier, Rabbah tries to explain why Hashrosh in the case of kidneos. But that's not the main point here of Shimon Shizuri. He wants to know what happens if you have a mixture, which means that since in the case of kidneos, the determining factor for the year of Maaser is going to be Hashrosha, when you have part of the kidneos that had Hashrosha before Rosh Hashana, they belong to last year, part after Rosh Hashana belong to the new year, Ein Tarbu Masrim Zeh Mitzeh Al Zeh. Each one needs, each representation, or I should say each section needs a representation in the Maaser of that section, of that Yashan or Chadash. Now, is there a solution to this problem? You now have a serious problem because you have this pull-up mitzri, and you've mixed together Yashan and Chadash. How will you achieve Hafrashas Maaser in such a case when the law is that Ein Mafrishim and a Yashan al Chadash, etc.? Keitzaru Oseh. So Shimon Shizuri offers a solution to this problem, and that is Sover Gorno L'Socha. He can set up a Kri, which is a perfect mixture of the Pula Yoshin and the Pula Chadash. And as a result, there's a Taroves in the Kri, Hetev, a very perfect mixture. In other words, we're going to rely on what we said before, Blila Yafa. So if that be the case, then we have a kash on Rabbah. Rabbah postulates that the reason why we go Basar Shrasha in the case of kidneys and not Basar Lakita like we do in Yerokos is because it's impossible, if you go Basar Lakita, to know which belong to last year and which belong to this year. In the case of Ashrosha, that's Koveh the Shnasa Masa, then it's uniform for all kidneys. But in the case of Lakita, we said that the Lakita is piecemeal. It's done in segments and not simultaneously, and therefore part of it belongs to last year, part of this year. Says Abaye, I don't get it. What's the problem? I have a simple solution. We'll go Basar Lakita, but we'll integrate them all into one Kri in a mixture that's called Blila Yafa. And then when he takes from the Kri Maaser, he's going to be taking a representation of both Yashan and Chadash. Amalei, so Rabbi responds, Rabbi Shimon Shizuri right? You're quoting Rabbi Shimon Shizuri holds that there is a Blila Yafa. Okay, Rabbi Shimon Shizuri Savar Yesh Bila, and everything is bolul, everything is mixed together. But Rabbanan, they rejected the Shita of Rabbi Shimon Shizuri, Yisavri and Bila. They never accepted the principle of Blila Yafa. And therefore, once again, we get back to the problem that Rabbi raised before, that you're going to be mafresh from both Yashan and from Chadash. And you don't have a takana, there's no way of solving that problem by making it taroves, because we accept the chachamim shita, there's no blili of. And therefore, we're going to be kovea for kidneos, the shnas hamas is according to Ashrosha, because Ashrosha is uniform. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani bar Shmuel halacha ki Rabbi Yossi ben Akipar shalom mishum Rabbi Shimon Shizuri. Now, the simple, straightforward pshat in this statement of Shmuel is that even if you have a case where part of this mixture had Hashrosha before Rosh Hashana, and part of it had Hashrosha after Rosh Hashana, with regard to these kidneos, we can mix them all together in a blila yafa and be mafresh massive from everything. I have a contradiction in the statement of Shmuel. The Amar Shmuel had a raw with regard to a tarovas of Maser with Yashan and Chadash, and he said lakol ein bilu, that for solid foods or substances we don't assume a perfect blila. Only in liquids do we have a perfect blila. Chutz min yayin v'shemen. So in the case of yayin v'shemen of liquids, we can be somek, we can rely on the fact that there is a perfect taroves, because that's what happens to liquids. And once again, we'll say in that taroves that what you mafresh from the chadash is for the chadash, from the yashan on the yashan. But in the case of solids, and certainly pul halavan and other kidneys are included under solids, Shmuel is making a commitment to the position of ein blil. So how do you reconcile that with the fact that he paskins like Shimon Shizuri, who held yesh blil? So Gemara says Reb Zera made a boo-boo here when he asked this question. Ishtamid to say he left it out, meaning he didn't pay attention. He ignored the fact that Hadi Amar Shmuel Hakol Holech Achar Gmar Pri. So now we're introducing a new and something that's going to substitute for Hashrosha, a new Kovei Lamaser with regard to kidneos, and that's called Gmar Pri. So I'm going to read the Masechet here. The Masechet explains, Masha Amar Shmuel Halacha Reb Shimon Shizuri Kavanasal Rak Lidin She'im Bolal Mitfua Sheshrisha B'Shana Achas Imtua Sheshrisha B'Shana Acheres Efshal Litrom Mizeh Al Zeh. And we thought that the reason for Reb Shimon Shizuri and for Shmuel accepting Reb Shimon Shizuri is because of Blila Yafa. And that's against Shmuel's position that in solid foods there's no blili yafa. No. The Gemara says that the reason why Rav Chizuri holds that in the case of a mixture between kidneos that had a shrosha last year and those that had this year, that you can solve that problem is not because of blila. Again, Rav Shimon Shizuri may have held the blila, but Shmuel never accepted that. Shmuel holds that the din is correct, but for an entirely different reason. And that is because we don't depend upon Ashrosh at all. We depend upon Gmar Peri. So Shmuel actually holds Ein Blila. But the Kovea, in the case of kidneys, is going to be Gmar Peri. So if we summarize, Shmuel is saying three different statements. Number one, he's saying Allah Rav Shim Shizuri. Then he's saying Lakol Yesh Blila, Lakol Ein Blila, Chutz Miyayin V'Shemen. And number three, he says Hakol Holechacha Gemar Pri. And now the Gemara is going to analyze these three statements of Shmuel and how each one addresses a different issue. And we have to have all three statements. Utzricha. The Iash meaning, if we start with the first statement of Allah Rav Shimon Shizuri, we would have assumed that if you make a mixture of kidneys, the Ashrasha were in 2 years, and yet you could be Torem from this entire mixture. Avamino, we would assume if we only had the first statement of Shmuel Allah Rav Shimon Shizuri, Yishuv the Kasara Yesh Blila. Kamash Malan, therefore Shmuel needs his second statement, Lakol Ein Bila. The Iash meaning Lakol Ein Bila. If we would have had only the second statement of Shmuel, that Bila only applies in liquids, but not in solids, Havamina, I would have said that Shmuel, in the case of kidneys, would not allow you, in a case of a tarovas of 2 different years, to be mafresh from the mixture. But rather, Shmuel would hold like the Rabbanan Spirale, that had no solution to the problem of this mixture. When I say no solution, it means, Rashi says, they'll have to bring kidneys from some other place, from last year's tour, from this year's tour, and then they'll make a cheshbon in the tour, and then they'll be mafresh. But per se, as is, in the mixture, as is now, Shmuel would, in this Havamina, would accept the sheet of the Chachamim that you have no takana, because you have a mixture of both Yashar and Chadash. And we hold Ein Bila. A Machmalah and Allah Rav Shimon Shizuri, which means the following, that you can be mafresh from this taroves of 2 different years of kidneys, but not for the logic of Rav Shimon Shizuri of Yesh Bila, because Shmuel's already committed to the position of Lakol Ein Bila. So he had to say that we pass like Rav Shimon Shizuri. But now, when we put A and B together, we end up in a confusion. We need a third statement of Shmuel, because if we only have these 2 statements of Shmuel, what's going on? On the one hand, Shmuel is rejecting Rav Shimon Shizuri, and he holds that Ein Bila. On the other hand, he's saying that we pass like Rav Shimon Shizuri, and you can be mafresh from the taromas. How do you reconcile that? Yashmin and Hani Tarti, Havamina Kasha de Shmuel Shmuel. Kamash Malon, what's the cost of Ashlishi Ayachriya Beinehem that's going to make it possible to reconcile 2 apparently mutually exclusive statements of Shmuel? Hakol Holech Hakumar Pri. So it means that Afim Akidnios Ishrishu B'Shtei Shonim, even though that Shrasha took place in 2 different years, because as we said before, with Kidnios, Hashrasha takes place in a piecemeal. Nevertheless, it's not considered Yashan and Chadash. Everything's considered Chadash because Holchin Achar Gemara Pri. And the Gemara Pri was in this year after Rosh Hashana. So when he passed like Rav Shimon Shazuri, it was not because of the reasoning that underlined Rav Shimon Shazuri, that you could be mafresh from this tarobas because Yesh Bila, that Shmuel rejected. But what did he accept from Rav Shimon Shazuri? The bottom line. Namely, that you could be mafresh from this taruas. How can you be mafresh from taruas? There's Yashan and Chadash mixed in, and Shmuel holds Ein Bila. The answer is because according to Shmuel, the kovea of Masros, or this year or last year, is Gemar Pri. And the Gemar Pri of all these kidneys took place this year, so we don't have a mixture of Yashan and Chadash, we have pure Chadash. Now the Gemara asks, yeah, sorry.
Sorry, it keeps whatchamacallit, it keeps pausing. Can I go in off my phone? Just give me 1 second. Just let me in. Okay, I'm going to go in off my phone.
So now the Gemara wants to know why couldn't Shmuel just give us, let the cat out of the bag and just simply say Akol Holech Achar Gemar Pri, and then we would have fit in all the other pieces of the puzzle. Iyashmin Akol Holech Achar Gemar Pri Hava Mina Afilu Tvu V'Zeisim Nami. We would have applied the yardstick of Shmuel that everything in Zraim in general depends upon Gmar Pri, and therefore we'd apply it to Zeisim and Tvua. We wouldn't limit it to Kitnios. A Mashmalan, Halacha Rav Shimon Shizuri, B'mai Depolik. On that point in which Rav Shimon Shizuri argues against the Chachamim, which means Kitnios, only in that context, we pass like Rav Shimon Shizuri. And even if there's a mixture, it's not going to be Yoshan B'Chadash because Hakol Holech Akmar Pri. So now the Gemara asks Lashmina and Hani Tarti. Why didn't Shmuel just tell us Halacha Rav Shimon Shizuri and Hakol Holech Akmar Pri? Is Lakol Ein Bila Lomoli? Why was it necessary to add this din? We could have derived it from the previous two statements of Shmuel. Since he said Akol Holech Akmar Pri, he's coming to teach us that he paskins Halacha Rav Shimon Shizuri, who said that Kitnios Shalo Eshrishu B'Yos Hashana, and then his Arvu, you could be Torah from everything together. And it's not because of Yesh Bila, it's not because it's a perfect Taroves, but because Holchem Achar Gmar Pri. And if that be the case, we understand that if he would hold Yesh Bila, and then we could apply it, let's say, to Zeisim and Tvua, then he wouldn't have to have said Hakol Holech Achar Gmar Pri, because even if we are Holech after Ashrasha, since the halacha is like Reb Shimon Shizuri because of Yesh Bila, so by definition it means that Shmuel holds Ein Bila. Kamash Malon, that's why he adds the L'Yayin V'Shemen Yesh Bila. Then you should know that when you have a liquid, there is Bila. Now, at this particular juncture, the Gemara is going to go back to a discussion that was much earlier about Yerokos. We said that the Shnas Masros, the year of the Yerokos, is determined by Lakita. Tanya, we learned in a Brisa of Yossi Aglili Omer. And now we're going to try to understand why Azlin and Basel Lakita, the Aspacha mi Garnacha umikvecha. We're going to darshan from this pasuk that we're talking about that which you gather in from your goren, from your yekev, and that's the din of masros. Ma goren v'yekev miyuchadim shem gedelim al mei shana sha'avra. In other words, these goren v'yekev, meaning tvua and anovin, they grow, or let's say shlish, most of their growth is from the rains of last year. And although it's not really ready to eat, it's not edible, but you could eat it if necessary. Umisasrin l'shana sha'avra. So that we know that in two of his anovim, it's going to be considered yashan because it reached the level of shlish last year. So the Shnas HaMasros depends upon Yardu Gishamim. Why? Because the rainwater is responsible for the growth of Tvuav HaNovim. Af kol shegedelim al mei shana shavra. Now we're going to derive in what we call a binyan av and apply this to all zroim, like for example, Parasa Elon, which depend on Chanata, but in any event, it depends the year of the Peros will be determined by the rainwater, because it's the rain that causes the tree to produce its fruit. So once the Peros HaElon reached the stage, which I guess you'd call it parallel to Shlish and Tfuah, and in Peros HaElon would be called Chanata, this Asun L'Shana Shavra, if it reached that stage when most of the rains fell, then it belongs to last year. And that's because, again, there's no din of Lakita with regard to Peros HaElon, there's a din of Chanata. Lots of Yerokos. Now, what's unique about vegetables is it's not like there's a massive amount of rain that falls down and then the Yerokos grow to their maturation and ready for harvest. No. The Yerokos grow constantly from the rain. So there's no such thing as Yardu Rov Geshamim. Therefore, Gedalim al Mei Shana Haba, even though, let's say, a massive, ample amount of rain fell last year, but nevertheless, the Yerokos are continuing to grow from the constant rain, even of this year. So if I did the Lakita this year, then the rains that generated the growth of the Yerokos were this year's rain. And therefore, Misashin L'Shana Haba. Therefore, the Maser depends upon this year, the year of Lakita. But Rabbi Akiva has a different drasha, and honestly, it's almost identical. And the Gemara is going to try to investigate what did Rabbi Akiva change from Rabbi Yossi HaGalili. So let's go through the drasha of Rabbi Akiva. Omer, he says, again, most of it is identical to Rabbi Yossi HaGalili, but then we get to the punchline at the end. Once most of the rainwaters have fallen, then the Anovim will be produced and the Tvuah will be produced. Once they reach Shlish, in last year when the rains fell down last year, therefore it belongs to last year, and the Maser has to be from last year. Af kol shegedelim al rov mayim. Like let's say, for example, you have trees that produce fruit. The fruit is produced based on rov mayim. Is misasim l'shana shavra. Yotze Yerokos shegedelim al kol mayim. Here's the punch. In Rabbi Yossi HaGalili, he says, where was it? Yotze Yerokos shegedelim al mei shana sha'avra. Al mei shana ba. Right? Because of the constant rains that supply the, so to speak, the nutrients to keep the Yerokos growing until we finally harvest them. But Rabbi Akiva says, Yotze Yerokos shegedelim al kol mayim, which means that they need irrigation. Vegetables will not, how do you say, subsist? Is that a word? Anyway, they won't live and grow based on rainwater. Rainwater is not sufficient to produce Yerokos. Okay?
Okay.
And that's what he says. And this is based on a pasuk in Dvarim Perek Yud Aleph. It says, "V'ishkisa b'raglecha kigan hayerek." So the Torah is talking about yerek, and it says v'hishkisa l'raglecha. That means irrigation. Is therefore misashin l'shana haba. You know, this is only when we get to Lakita, after we irrigated it, that's when we kover the shnas maaser. It becomes now Chadash, and you cannot attribute the Yerek to the Rov Geshamim of last year because a Yerek is Gadel on Rov Mayim. I'm sorry, al kol mayim. Kol mayim means rov mayim, rainwater is not sufficient. My beinayu, what's the nafkamina between Rabbi Yossi HaGlili and Rabbi Akiva? Now we're going to look for a case which is a little bit exceptional. And according to Rabbi Yossi, if it's exceptional, then it may belong to last year. Or Rabbi Avo Bitsolim Hasorisin, which I think is called scallions. Let me just see, I have an English translation here. See if I can find the page. Where are we? Yudal, right? He says, oh boy, I don't even know how to read this. Eunuch onions. I don't know what that means.
What's it called? Eunuch?
Unusually small onions. And then he quotes the Rambam that it's a type of onion which is like a eunuch in the sense that it does not sprout green leaves when it's kept in a moist place after being picked. I don't know. I always thought it was scallions, but okay, whatever it is. Upul Mitzri that we mentioned before. Ikabenai, why? Tisnan, a Mishnah in the second paragraph of Shvi is Bitzolim Asarisu Pula Mitzri Shemona Mehem Mayim Shloshim Yom Lifnei Rosh Hashana. For the last 30 days before Rosh Hashana, they did not add water to the onions or scallions or these Egyptian beans. Now, the Lakita was after Rosh Hashanah. So according to all the rules and regulations that govern Yerakos, these should be Chadash. And yet the Mishnah says, Misasrim L'Sha'avar. They go, the Meiser Shana would be last year because we cannot say that possibly that they grew because of this year's water, because he didn't water them. And therefore, in terms of Shnos HaShvita, belongs to the Shichis, Mutar and Mishvias. We suspend the normal operational principle of Lakita because we know that there were no waters that were irrigated to post Rosh Hashanah to cause the growth of these two vegetables. V'im lav. But if we did not deny water, but rather Hishko Sam, right before Rosh Hashanah, he irrigated the field and then he did the Lakita in the 7th year of Shemitah, Asur B'Shviyas. U'Misasron L'Shana Ba, they belong from Maser to the new year. This Mishnah is going to have to reflect the Shita of Rabbi Yossi HaGlili, because Rabbi Yossi HaGlili says that the logic that dictates Lakita is the fact that there's water that's coming down and irrigating the field now, after Rosh Hashanah. But in this case, he was Monea. He withheld the waters for that 30-day period. But according to Rabbi Akiva, and here's the punchline, that the reason why in Yerakos Lakita determines the year is because it's not similar to Gora and V'Yeken. It's Gadol al Kol Mayim. It needs irrigation water. So even though you found one particular case in which they were Monea Mayim, but nevertheless the din is not going to change. Why? Because Rabbi Akiva is saying something fundamental about Yerakos. That the Darkom Shel Yerakos is that they're Gadol al Kol Mayim. And therefore, we will always, with regard to Yerakos, be Kovea Basar Lakita. Yechad b'Shvat Rosh Hashanah le'Ilan, according to Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel say b'Chamisha Asar b'Shvat. My timer. What's the reason for Beis Hillel? who maintain that Rosh Hashana Le'ilon is Tu B'Shvat. And by the way, Tu B'Shvat is a very unusual kind of Rosh Hashanah. It splits the year into two. It splits 1 month into two different years. But anyway, Rabbi Lezer, Lazar, Rabbi Oshaya, Hoel V'Yotzu, Rov Gishmei Shana. Now he adds another 4 words which we don't understand. The Gemara doesn't understand too. But let's go with the main thrust of what he's saying. Yatsu Rov Gishmei Shana. Now the rainy season begins in Cheshvan, in the last part of Cheshvan, which is called the 17th of Cheshvan, and it continues until Nisan. So we have half of Cheshvan, let's say Cheshvan, Kislev, Teves, Shvat, Adar, and let's say half of Nisan. So we have 6 months of the rainy season. Now, if we divide up those 6 months, then we have Cheshvan, Kislev, Teves, but we're only talking about halfway into Cheshvan. So when we get to Shvat, it's only 2.5 months of rainy season. Says Basil, therefore let's add another 2 weeks into Shvat. And by the time we get to the 15th of Shvat, we've already passed the Rov point in which most of the rains of this winter season have fallen. It doesn't work out precisely because it should have been the 17th of Shvat. Just 1 second. In case, Ira, you turn on the radio, maybe you'll tell me what's going on out there. You'll tell me from Toronto because the jets are flying and very low. I don't know.
I don't hear them.
You didn't hear it? Oh my God. No. Thundering.
I'm not, really?
The jets are thundering. Oh, here's another one. Oh no, that.
No, it's not coming through to me.
All right. In any event, so according to Basil's theory, by the 15th of Shvat, which is almost 3 months since the beginning of the rainy season, we have most of the rainy season. Why? Because what's left now after Tu B'Shvat is half of Shvat, Adar and Nisan, and that's 2.5 months. Chavav, what does he say here? He says that, the rain in Nisan is somewhat limited. So Nisan is not really a full-fledged rainy month.
Right.
So in any event, the calculation is by the 15th of Shvat, most of the rains have fallen. And here Rashi adds, and the Ritva embellishes it, that Al Yidei HaGeshamim, once most of the rains have fallen, Ola Hasraf Bi'Ilonos, right, the trees have roots below the ground. The ground has now absorbed the rainwaters below the ground, so the roots are now full with rain, with moisture. And therefore, from now on, the trees can produce their fruit. Al Yidei HaGeshamim Ola Hasraf Be'ilon. I guess the moisture from the roots now travels up to the tree, and it goes into the peros, and that's called Chanotas HaPeros. And as we said before on Daf Yud Gimel, in Peros HaIlon we go Basar Chanot. Vadayin Rov Tkufa Bachutz. What's this Rov Tkufa Bachutz? Now keep in mind, we're talking about Tkufas Teves, right? There are 4 Tkufas. We're talking about Tkufas Teves, which is the Tkufa of the winter months. And that begins in the month of Teves, and it doesn't end until the beginning of the month of Nisan. So Teves, Shvat, Adar, you've got 3 months, right? There are 4 Tkufos, so you divide up to 12 months. So it's 3 months for each Tkufa. So Tkufas Teves will end at the beginning of what? At the beginning of Nisan. My God, why is this relevant? Well, what is Rav Oshia telling me? That Vadai roved Kufa Bachutz. Now, 1 second. Nisan, we're talking about Shvat. Well, let's just make the calculation. Right, Shvat. We're in the middle of Shvat. So we have 2 weeks left in Shvat. Then we have the month of Adar and part of Nisan. Okay. So most of the Tkufa is Bachutz. Bachutz meaning Tu B'Shvat is in the first half of Tkufa's Teves. We haven't passed the midpoint yet. Afal Pi. Now it makes sense. You know, the way we read the text, it's Adayin Rov Tkufa Bachutz, as if to say that's an explanation for Tu B'Shvat. That doesn't make any sense. But it means Afal Pi Sherov Tkufa Bachutz, because we haven't even hit the midpoint of Tkufa's Teves, and nevertheless, it's already Rosh Hashana Lilanos, and after Tu B'Shvat, we enter into the new year of the fruit trees. Everything depends not on the Tkufa, but rather on the Gishmei Shana. Tana Rabbanon, Maisa Rabbi Akiva, Shalikate Esrog, V'echad B'Shvat. Okay, so we're talking about the second year going into the third year, which means that if it belongs to the second year, then it's Meiser Sheni. If it belongs to the third year, it's Meiser Oni. V'noag bo shnei isurim. It's what you call a briska chumrah. Rabbi Akiva was mafresh both Meiser Sheni, meaning he considered it already. No, I'm sorry. He considered it belonging to last year, like Beis Hillel. And he was mafresh Meiser Ani, like the Shita Beit Shammai, that we're already in the new year because it's after Aleph Shvat. Now we turn to Yudalad Amid Beis, and he says, Echad Kedire Beit Shammai, Echad Kedire Beis Hillel, which is really interesting. We never find, you know, that the halacha is like Beit Shammai against Beis Hillel, but I guess back in the time of Rabbi Akiva, it was still an issue. And we were learning a little bit of Yevamis, and Yevamis is Machlokas Batzaras Erva, and it seems that back in the day, there were those who passed like Beis Hillel against Beit Shammai. So imagine, you know, this is Reb Chaim Brisker is famous for being machmir for all the sheepos. You know, he tries to satisfy everyone. So Reb Akiva wanted to satisfy both Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai. So he's mafresh Meiser Sheni ki Beis Hillel and Meiser Oni ki Beit Shammai. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer lo minig Beit Shammai Beis Hillel nog. We misunderstood Rabbi Akiva. The reasoning of Rabbi Akiva that he was mafresh two masros is not because he had a suffix, but the halacha is like Beit Shammai Aleph Shvat, or like Beis Hillel Tu B'Shvat. Ela minog Rabbi Gamliel Rabbi Eliezer nog. He was doing this because he had a suffix where the halacha is like Rabbi Gamliel or Rabbi Eliezer. In the Mishnah Bikurim, in the second perek, which has to do with the status of the esrog. Isnan, we learned in the Mishnah Bikurim, the second perek, esrog shavel le'ilan b'shlosha drachim u'leyerek b'derech echad. The status of an esrog is equal to all peros ha'ilon with regard to 3 halachos. For example, chanota, but it's equal to yerek in one way. And that's lakita. B'derech echad, shavel le'ilan b'shlosha, right, period. Shavel le'ilan b'shlosha drachim, aleph linyan orla, beis linyan aray, and gimel linyan shvius. Now the payros in the first 3 years are also bachila and bana, and they are called arl. So those are the first 3 years of the tzmichas ha'ilon, when the tree starts producing fruits. Now, if the chanota was in the let's say in the 3rd year, even though the lakita took place in the 4th year, it's also mishum arl. And that's the din of esrog. Esrog, in that sense, is shavel le'ilon, as opposed to Yirakus with basal lekita, shavel le'ilon, basal chanot. The revive, that means if the chanot took place in the 4th year, even though the lekita took place in the 5th year, it has the status of revive, which means it has to be brought to Yerushalayim or pigeon outside Yerushalayim. The shvius, you have fruits that reached Hanota during the 7th year, even though the Lakita was in the 8th year, it has Kedusha shvius. However, liyerek b'derech echad sheb'shas Lakitoso isura. That Meiser will be determined in the case of an esrog by Lakita, not by Chanota. So even though the Chanota, let's say, was in the 2nd year of Shemitah, the Lakita was in the 3rd year, and it's going to be Noeg Maser Oni. It's as if he grew in the 3rd year, even though he reached Chanota in the 2nd year, because with regard to Masros, it's Shaveh Liyera, also Lakita. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Esrog Shavel Le'ila L'chol Davar. Even with regard to Maser, Chanota is going to determine the halach of Peres Elon. So if the Chanota was in the 2nd year of Shemitah, then we're Mafresh Maser Shena. If the Chanota was in the 3rd year, we're Mafresh Maser Oni. Now we get back to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was a case of Lakitas Esrog B'Echad B'Shvat. And we're talking the 3rd year of Shemitah. According to Beit Shammai, it's already Rosh Hashana Lilonos. And therefore, according to Rambam Gamliel, he should be Mafresh Maser from this Esrog based on Zman Lakita, which would mean Maser Oni, Peiros, Shana Shlishis, since the Lakita of the Esrog was in the 3rd year. However, according to Rabbi Eliezer, that Esrog, even with regard to Maser's Basal Chanota, then he should be Mafresh Maser Sheni, like the Peiros of the previous year, because there was Chanot already in the 2nd year. So Lakita was in the 3rd year, let's say after Rosh Chodesh Shvat, according to Beis Shammai, but the Chanot was in the 2nd year. Now, if we're going to be Machmir for Rabbi Eliezer, then he has to be Mafresh Maser Sheni. If on the other year we accept Rabbi Gamliel, he should be Mafresh Maser Oni. And that's what Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda is saying, that Rabbi Akiva wanted to Mekayim both the Psak Halacha of Rabbi Gamliel and at the same time that of Rabbi Eliezer. Therefore, he's Mafresh both Maser Oni, Maser Sheni, Maser Oni. Now, if we go back to the original opinion in the Brisa, it seems that Rabbi Akiva was Machmir for both Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. So the Gemara asks a question on this understanding of Rabbi Akiva that it was Machmir for both Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, and he took 2 chumras. We have a principle that you're not Machmir for 2 chumras if they are mutually exclusive, if they contradict one another. According to Beit Shammai, the prayers belong to the second year. I'm sorry, to the third year, according to Beis Hillel, to the second year. You can never have a case where one pre belongs to both the first, the second year, and the third year. Can you actually be machmir for two shitos lechumra when there's a stira from one to the other, mutually exclusive? Tanya, we have a brisa that establishes that liolam halacha kedivrei Beis Hillel. Right, we have a baskol that came out in Masechet Eruvin Yud Gimel after a 3-year machlokus between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai, and the baskol came out and said Elu ve'elu divrei Kim Chaim halacha ki Beis Hillel. But before the baskol, Rotza Lasus Kedivrei Beit Shammai Osa, Rotza Lasus Kedivrei Beis Hillel Osa. The jets are flying. So in other words, you can either take the Binoig like Beis Hillel or Beit Shammai. But if it's a machlokes in a way that this hanhaga is a kula according to the other, and it's a chumrah according to the other opinion, right? So then, if you're knowing mikule Beit Shammai, begam mikule Beis Hillel, Rosh, that's not something that's acceptable. You can't take the kulas of both shitos. Not only that, but michumre Beit Shammai ubeichumre Beis Hillel, that's also unacceptable. All of akosav omer haksil b'choshech cholech. He's walking in the darkness. Eli should be consistent. Ike Beit Shammai b'kuleim ubechumreim. Ike Beis Hillel b'kuleim ubechumreim. You have to go straight with them. Now, in the story of Rabbi Akiva, we have here a stira between Maser Sheni Beis Hillel and Maser Oni Beit Shammai, and yet Rabbi Akiva was machmir for both of these mutually exclusive contradictory shitas by being machmir with both the second year of Shemitah and the third year of Shemitah for these perils. How could he do so? And the Gemara answers, Rabbi Akiva Gemore is topic. He had a suffix in his own Talmud as to what is the opinion of Beis Hillel. So again, now we're saying that he wanted to be Noeg Beis Hillel and exclusively Beis Hillel. So we understand very well why he was Mafresh Maser Sheni. Why was he Mafresh Maser Oni? Below Yada, I Beis Hillel b'echad b'shvat amru, I b'chamisha so b'shvat amru. There were two different traditions about the machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai, who held what. And it was possible, according to one tradition, that Beis Hillel were the ones who held Aleph Shvat. And therefore, Rabbi Akiva accepted Beis Hillel hook, line, and sinker, but with, when is Rosh Hashana le Peres HaElon? Is it Aleph Shvat or is it Tu B'Shvat? There's no way of knowing, and therefore you have to be machmir both for Maser Sheni and Maser Oni. So the Gemara asks, if Rabbi Akiva did the Lakita of the Esrog B'Echad B'Shvat, according to Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehudi was Noeg, like the Machlokas based Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Lezer, about the Kviyas Man of Chiyav Esrog B'Maser, if we're Kovei the Shana based on Lakita or based on Chanota, is Kibeit Shammai Noeg. Comes out that according to this tradition, this understanding of Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Akiva was following the Shita of Beis Shammai, that Rosh Hashanah is Echad B'Shvat. According to Beis Hillel, it's only on the 15th of Shvat. That's when Rosh Hashanah L'Ilon is to be Chal. And then L'Divrei HaKol, he should be mafresh like the earlier year, meaning Meiser Sheni. So Rabbi Akiva is a Talmud of Rabbi Hillel, and he's pasking halacha, in this case, like Beit Shammai. Rab Chanina, v'yitem Rab Chanina, Rab Chananya, excuse me, Hacha. Here in the story of Rabbi Akiva, he was malakid in Esrog on Echad B'Shvat. According to Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, B'Esrog shechantu peirotzav kodem chamisha so. The Idach Shvat askim. this is where we're going to stop, because here's where the waters get complicated and we're already very late. Okay, then have a great week. Thank you so much.